The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from my morning walk. Not an envelope I recognized. No return address. Just my name typed on the front, Mr. Edwin Holloway, in that cold official font that never means good news. I stood there in my coat, still breathing hard from the 2 miles I'd done around the neighborhood, and I stared at it for probably 30 seconds before I picked it up. 63 years old, and something about that envelope made my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the walk. It was from a debt collection agency out of Columbus. They were notifying me that an account opened in my name. A personal line of credit for $47,000 was now 90 days past due. They had my social security number, my old address on Birchwood Drive, my date of birth. I had to sit down. I hadn't opened any line of credit. I hadn't borrowed $47,000. I hadn't done any of it. But my son had. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My wife, June, passed away 4 years ago this November. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 11 weeks from the day they told us. 11 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say to a person you've spent 38 years loving, but we did the best we could. The last thing she said to me in that hospital room with the late afternoon light coming through the blinds was, "Don't let them take advantage of you, Ed. You're too kind for your own good." I thought she was talking about the hospital billing department. I understand now she meant our son. His name is Colin. He's 41. For most of his adult life, I told myself the problems he had were just bad luck. Lost his job during the 2008 crash. Bad luck. Marriage fell apart. Bad luck. That business he tried to start with the food truck. Bad luck. That business he tried to start with the food truck. Bad luck. I co-signed on a small loan for that one back in 2019. He paid it back eventually. Took 3 years longer than he said it would, but he paid it. June never trusted him the way I did. She loved him, the way a mother loves regardless. But she had a clarity about him that I was always too close to see. She kept the finances locked down when she was alive. Her name, her passwords, her oversight. After she was gone, I was on my own with all of it. And I didn't have her eyes. Colin knew that. He started coming around more after June died. I told myself that was grief, that he was coming to be close to what was left of his mother. He'd sit in her kitchen and drink my coffee and talk about his ideas. He always had ideas. There was one about buying a rental property together. He'd manage it, I'd put up the capital. There was one about some investment in a friend's distribution company. There was always a friend, always an opportunity that was only available right now, only for a limited time. I said no to most of them. But I let him move back into the guest room for what he said would be 6 weeks while he got back on his feet. That was 14 months before I found the letter. I'm not a stupid man. I worked as an electrical engineer for 31 years. I understand systems. I understand how things connect and where they fail. But grief does something to your judgment. It softens the edges of things. You want the people you love to be who you need them to be. And Colin was the last family I had close by. My daughter, Rihanna, lives out in Portland with her husband and their 2 kids. She calls every Sunday. But she's 2 time zones away, and Colin was right there. And I was lonely in a way I didn't fully admit to myself. So I let him stay. I let him into the house that June and I had built together. And at some point during those 14 months, he got into my filing cabinet. He would have needed my social security card, my birth certificate, the mortgage documents that had my account numbers on them. All of it was in the cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one he was sleeping in. The line of credit had been opened 8 months earlier. Online application, digital signature. Someone had scanned my documents and submitted everything. The money had been deposited into an account I'd never heard of and drained within 2 weeks. When I called the bank, they confirmed the account was opened with my information but with an email address that wasn't mine. When I pressed them on how this could happen, the woman on the phone was very careful and very professional and said almost nothing useful. I drove to the police station that same afternoon. The officer I spoke with was patient. He took notes. He explained that identity fraud cases involving family members were complicated, that even if my son had done this, proving intent versus authorized use was difficult. He used that phrase, authorized use, and I had to take a breath before I responded. He did not have my authorization, I said. For any of it. Yes, sir. I understand. But you allowed him to live in the home. I didn't allow him to steal my identity. He took more notes. He told me to file with the FTC, to contact the 3 credit bureaus to get a fraud alert put on my file. He said someone would follow up. I drove home in a kind of silence I hadn't felt since the hospital. Colin was in the living room when I got back. He was watching television, a half-eaten sandwich on the coffee table, shoes off like he owned the place. He looked up when I came in. "Hey, Dad, you okay? You look pale." I stood in the doorway of my own living room and looked at my son and tried to find something in his face that told me I was wrong, that the letter was a mistake, that there was some explanation I hadn't thought of. He looked back at me with his face open and relaxed, and I knew. "I need you to leave," I said. He sat up straighter. "What?" "I need you to get your things and leave my house, tonight." "Dad, what's going on?" "I got a letter from a collection agency," I said, "about a $47,000 line of credit opened in my name 8 months ago." The way his eyes moved, just slightly, just for a half second to the left, that was enough. June had told me for years that Colin's eyes went left when he was calculating. I'd always thought she was being too hard on him. "I don't know anything about that," he said. "Get out of my house, Colin." He tried for another 20 minutes. He was confused. He was hurt. He couldn't believe I would accuse him. He had been going through so much, he needed me to just listen. His voice went from defensive to wounded to angry and back again. I sat in June's old chair with my hands on my knees and I said nothing. When he finally left, he slammed the door so hard one of her pictures rattled on the wall. I sat in the silence for a long time after that. I didn't hear from Rihanna for 3 days, which told me Colin had called her first and gotten his version in before mine. When she did call on a Wednesday evening, she was careful in the way people are when they've been coached. "Dad, I just want to make sure you're hearing him out," she said. "He says there might be some miscommunication, Rihanna." I said her name quietly. "Your brother opened a line of credit using my social security number and my identity documents without my knowledge or consent. That is not a miscommunication. That is a crime." Silence on the line. "He told you a different version of events," I said. It wasn't a question. "He said you had talked about him handling some of your finances and that maybe there was a misunderstanding about what you'd agreed to." I closed my eyes. "I never agreed to anything like that. Not once. Not in any conversation." Another silence. Then, quietly, "I believe you, Dad." She said it like she'd needed permission to say it out loud. Like part of her had known and been waiting. That was when she told me about Nadia. Nadia is my granddaughter. She's 17, Rihanna's oldest, and she visits every summer for 2 weeks. She's a quiet girl, serious in the way some teenagers are when they've figured out that the world is more complicated than it looks. She's studying computer science at her high school, takes it more seriously than most adults I know take their careers. Last summer, she'd been staying with me when Colin was still in the guest room. I hadn't noticed anything unusual. She'd spent a lot of time on her laptop, as teenagers do, and she and Colin had been politely distant with each other in the way that happens when people don't have much in common. What I didn't know was that she'd seen something. She'd been coming down for a glass of water late one night. She's always been a night owl, gets it from her mother, and she'd seen Colin in the spare room with my filing cabinet open. The lamp was on. He had papers spread on the bed. She'd watched for a moment from the hallway, then gone back upstairs without saying anything. She didn't tell me. She was 16 and she wasn't sure what she'd seen, and she didn't want to cause problems in the family over something she might have misread. But she'd taken a photo on her phone, just one, through the crack in the door, slightly blurry but showing Colin clearly with documents spread in front of him. She'd held on to it for almost a year. When Rihanna told me this, I had to sit down again. "I seem to be sitting down a lot in this story. She wanted to tell you herself," Rihanna said. "She's been worried about you. She asked me last week if you were doing okay, and when I told her there was a situation with Colin, she went quiet for a minute and then she said, 'Mom, I think I have something that might help Grandpa.'" Rihanna put her on the phone. "Grandpa," Nadia said. Her voice was steady in the way I've always admired about her. Not performing anything, just speaking. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I wasn't sure what I saw, but I kept the picture." I had to clear my throat before I could answer. "You kept it for a whole year. I didn't know if you'd need it. I hoped you wouldn't." A pause. "Do you need it?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "I think I do." She sent it to me that night. The image was grainy, taken in low light through a narrow gap, but a good forensic examiner could make out enough. Colin's face, the open filing cabinet, documents on the bed. It wasn't a confession. But paired with the FTC complaint, the fraud alert, and the bank records showing my identity information used on an application I never made, it was something. I went back to the police station the next morning with a folder. The same officer listened more carefully this time. He brought in someone else partway through, a detective who handled financial crimes. She asked sharp questions and wrote a lot more notes than the officer had. When I showed her the photo, she looked at it for a long time. "Your granddaughter took this?" she asked. 17 years old, I said. "She thought she might need it someday." The detective looked up at me. "Smart kid." "She gets it from her grandmother," I said, and I meant it. The investigation took 4 months. I won't pretend it was easy. There were calls from the bank's fraud department, meetings with an attorney I hired, a woman named Patricia who specializes in identity theft cases, and several nights where I sat in June's chair and stared at the wall and tried to remember what it had felt like to have a family that made sense. Colin called twice during those months. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to explain that things had gotten out of hand, that he planned to pay it back before I ever found out. As if that was somehow better. As if the problem was discovery rather than the act itself. The second call I picked up. I don't know why. "Dad," he said. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. "Colin, are you really doing this to your own son?" I held the phone and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard June had planted with her own hands, the rose bushes she'd tended for 20 years, the bird feeder she'd hung from the maple tree. "You did this," I said, "not me." I hung up. Patricia told me later that Colin had attempted to claim, through his own attorney, that I had verbally authorized him to apply for credit on my behalf. The bank's records showed no documentation of any such arrangement. My written statement, the FTC report, and the photo Nadia had taken were all part of the case file. He was charged with identity theft and financial fraud, 2 felony counts. He pleaded guilty in a deal that got 1 count reduced. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, a $15,000 fine, and court-ordered restitution. The full $47,000, I was told, would likely take years to recover even with the restitution order. These things always do. Patricia helped me file a civil suit on top of the criminal case. She was honest with me about the odds. We might see a portion of it eventually. We might not. I've made my peace with that. In the way you make peace with things that don't stop hurting but stop surprising you. What I didn't expect was what happened on a Saturday afternoon in late March, when Rihanna drove up from the airport. She'd flown in for a long weekend, with both kids in tow. Nadia walked through my front door with her roller bag and her laptop case, and gave me a hug that lasted longer than our usual ones. I held on to her and thought about a 16-year-old girl, alone in a hallway in the dark, deciding to take a photo she hoped she'd never need. "You didn't have to do that," I told her. "Hold on to that for so long. You could have told me." She pulled back and looked at me with her mother's eyes. "You were still grieving Grandma," she said. "I didn't want to add to it, and I wasn't sure. I needed to be sure before I said anything." "You were sure enough to keep the picture." She thought about that for a moment. "I guess I trusted my gut," she said. "Grandma always said to trust your gut." I hadn't told her June used to say that. I don't know if Rihanna had, or if she'd picked it up herself, or if some knowledge just travels through families without anyone carrying it consciously. "She did," I said. "She absolutely did." We had dinner that night, the 4 of us in the kitchen that used to feel too big and too quiet. Rihanna made June's pot roast from the recipe card she'd laminated years ago when she realized her mother wasn't going to be around forever to ask. The kids set the table without being asked. At some point during the meal, I looked around at all three of them and felt something shift in my chest. Not healed, not fixed, but lighter than it had been in a long time. The fraud alert is still on my credit file. I check my accounts every week now, something I didn't used to do. Patricia suggested I get a credit lock on all three bureaus, and I did. I shredded the documents in the filing cabinet and moved the important ones to a safe with a combination only I know. These are small changes. They feel significant. I still think about Colin sometimes, in the way you can't stop thinking about something that was supposed to be one thing and turned out to be another. I don't know if what I feel toward him is grief or anger or just the particular exhaustion of having loved someone longer than they deserved it. Maybe all three. June would have had a word for it. She always had the right word. What I know is this: Rihanna calls every Sunday, same as always. Nadia is applying to college in the fall, computer science naturally. She sends me articles sometimes, things she thinks I'd find interesting. And we text back and forth in the way I never managed with Colin even when things were good. Last week, she sent me a message that just said, "Grandpa, I found a better lock for your filing cabinet if you want." Biometric. Very hard to crack. I wrote back, "I think I'm okay, but thank you for looking out for me." She replied with a single word, "Always." I read that word 3 times. Then I set the phone down on June's kitchen table and looked out at the rose bushes in the backyard, bare still in the early spring, but already showing the first small buds. There's something about that. I'm not sure I have the right word for it either, but it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like something that decides, on its own, to keep going. I've thought a lot about what June said to me in that hospital room. Don't let them take advantage of you, Ed. You're too kind for your own good. For a long time, I believed kindness and judgment were opposites, that you had to choose one or the other. That being a good father meant giving the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt was staring you in the face. I understand now that's not kindness. That's just fear wearing kindness like a coat. What Colin did had been building for years. Not the fraud specifically, but everything underneath it. The pattern of taking without asking, of borrowing without intending to return, of counting on my willingness to look the other way because looking directly at it would mean deciding something I wasn't ready to decide. He didn't steal from a stranger. He stole from his own father, using documents from the room I gave him to sleep in, and he calculated, correctly, for a long time, that I wouldn't do anything about it. That calculation was built on knowing me, on knowing that I'd lost June, that I was lonely, that I wanted family around me more than I wanted the truth. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Nadia. She was 16 years old, alone in a dark hallway, and she saw something that didn't feel right. She didn't have all the information. She didn't know for certain what she was looking at. But she trusted what she felt, and instead of dismissing it or telling herself it was none of her business, she did something. One quiet decision, one photo on her phone, 1 year of holding on to it in case it was ever needed. That's not a small thing. Most adults I know would have walked back to bed and convinced themselves they'd imagined it. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from a classroom, the kind that notices, connects, and acts even when acting is uncomfortable. Nadia has it. She came to my house every summer and paid attention in the way that people who genuinely love you pay attention. She watched, she remembered. She understood at 17 that protecting someone you love sometimes means holding something difficult for a long time without knowing if it will ever matter. And then there's the question of what I had to do once I knew. Filing that report. Going back to the station with the folder. Sitting across from my son and saying the words out loud. None of that was easy. There's no version of it that feels like winning. You don't come out the other side of something like this feeling triumphant. You come out tired and a little emptier in the place where a certain kind of hope used to live. But you come out with your own self intact. That matters more than I knew it would. The rose bushes are blooming again. June planted them 20 years ago, and they come back every spring whether I tend them carefully or not. I've been tending them more carefully this year. Nadia texts me things she thinks I'll find interesting. Last week, it was an article about how identity theft cases involving family members are the fastest growing category of financial fraud in the country. She added, "Grandpa, please tell me you still have the biometric lock on your cart." I told her yes. She said, "Good, I'm watching, I believe her. And I think whatever she grows up to be, she'll be good at it. Not because she's clever, though she is, but because she already understands the thing that takes most people a lifetime to learn, that showing up for someone, quietly and without being asked, is the realest form of love there is. I wish I'd understood that earlier. I wish a lot of things. But I'm 63 years old, not dead, and there's still time to do better with what's left."